And now the Zoom lady hath bestowed upon us. It is time to start talking. So, welcome, Dan, and you have the honorable pleasure of being the first person on Inner Strength Check podcast, and I have the honor of messing that up. First person to be interviewed in this format in the tabletop space. So, welcome, and let's get cracking.
Absolute honor to be here, especially after the guitars and drums came through.
Awesome, awesome. So a little bit about Dan. So Dan is Master of Primary Education trained teacher. Currently doing, as you just mentioned, a course on teaching English as a second language. You're also involved with quite a few things, my friend. You've got your GMing with Melbourne Gamers, and then you're
Hmm.
also involved with racing three chickens, two dogs, two kids in Footscray. And then on top of
Yes,
that, you're running weekly tabletop therapy or tabletop RPG groups with a therapeutic focus for um, teenagers in Footscray.
that's right. Yes, that's been going for a few years now. That last one.
Wow. So that's a lot. That's a lot. You got a
Yes.
lot going on, a lot on your plate, mate. Yeah.
Yeah, it feels a bit crazy sometimes, but
Mm,
pretty lucky that we can. My wife and I are really good at supporting each other and doing our external things as well as what's needed for the family. And
yeah.
yeah, that's it's been great.
That's awesome. So, catch me up a little bit on where you're at with everything. So you're doing
Mhm.
some work, but on around that, like you've done a fair bit, mate. I've seen that you've been involved with you've been on some panels, for instance, with PAX,
Yep.
and you've got your own blog. So there's
Mhm.
quite a fair bit happening at the moment. What's your current sort of focus?
Well, my main thing at the moment, so with my primary teaching, I teach at a school called the Western English Language School, where we teach new migrants,
Mm,
children how to speak English, get ready for mainstream schools.
hmm
And what I've been doing with that, and an experiment I've been doing that has so far been really successful, is
mm.
doing this like choose your own adventure stories with them.
Ah,
So I'll put up like a little PowerPoint presentation, and the kids can make choices about what the character sees and does, and how they go about it. And then they all write a little short story about about what happened in our collective story. Um, because what we were finding with these kids was they were kind of struggling with that narration, that
mm,
storytelling part. Like
mm,
they could do short answers, but not this kind of longer form.
mm.
Um, so the preppy kids, they'll make a comic book out of it and just kind of draw and do what they can. But I also work with up to grade five, sixes, and some of those kids are on the way to writing novels. Like they're writing 2 or 3 pages a week
Wow.
on these
Wow.
stories.
Wow.
Um, so it's yeah, we're just doing it at my little campus at the moment, but I'm really hoping once I've kind of gotten the evidence to show how well it's been working, we'll be able to spread it out to a few more schools and yeah, get it out there.
That's fantastic. And I guess that's an interesting thing, isn't it? The fact that you've basically taken one of the core elements of tabletop role playing, which is that narrative
Hmm.
and element, boiled it down to an accessible format. And there's already proof in the pudding that at least having that sort of skeletal framework of what constitutes role playing or that group dynamic has
Hmm.
already led to some good outcomes by the sounds of it.
That's right. So a couple of years ago, I published my own role-playing game. It was really rules light and just involved rolling six-sided dice. When I first started doing this experiment, I did try and bring the dice rolling element into it, but I just found it took up too much time compared to what was needed for the writing aspect. So,
Mm,
yeah, did away with the role with the chance element, just made it more about the choices of the
mm,
kids.
mm.
And yeah, like one kid in particular, it's almost like they're writing their own Dogman novel. So their hero is Dogman from the YA books, and then he's got a partner who's somehow an eagle with two guns, and I just crack up every
Amazing.
time I read
That is a
this kid's
born
story,
role player right there.
right?
That's
And
awesome.
so yeah, and then on top of that, just kind of like learning about how language is taught and
Mm,
kind of trying to incorporate that into the classes as well.
mm. So you've got that going at the moment. And
Hmm.
then on the other end of the scale, you're actually working with kids that are a bit older, like adolescents, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so is
So
that a little
16
bit?
plus.
Yep. And I saw that you were running a D&D campaign based off of Dark of Hot Springs Island. Is that
That's
still
right.
going, or what are you sort of doing at the moment?
It's the same group. So Dark of Hot Springs Island, if you're not familiar with it, is a hex crawl. So it's really open-ended. And the kids played D&D, which just kind of wandered around um, and made a few really interesting choices, and ultimately ended up destroying the island in fire and flame. Um, it's just like
Yes.
this wonderful moment where they saw this treasure and like, yeah, you've killed the genie, you see all this treasure, and then lava starts spewing up, and you lose all the treasure, and you have to run out the portal to escape, and um, it was very funny. Uh, so the same group continues. We don't play Dungeons and Dragons anymore, and I feel like this might be a controversial topic because I feel like when a lot of people do talk about these role-playing game therapies,
Mm,
they are focused on D&D for its
mm,
marketing, basically, because it's the
mm,
most
mm,
recognizable game out there. It's the
mm.
monopoly of role-playing games. Um, so I tried a few different games, and what we settled on is powered by the apocalypse style games.
Yeah. Mm,
So if you're not familiar with the difference, instead of using 20-sided dice for every action, you're using two six-sided dice. The maths is a lot simpler.
mm,
The game master doesn't roll, so things like combat are basically the time involved is halved,
mm,
and there's a lot of different settings for it. So we started off playing a fantasy-based one just to kind
mm.
of ease the kids in, and now we're playing Scum and Villainy, which is a Star
Oh,
Wars
man.
heisting hack. And
Does people who are psychologically 16 count?
well, it would be wonderful to kind of expand it out. Unfortunately, as we said, I've got a few other plates of the
Yeah.
fire, so I really only have the time for the one game.
Mm,
But it has been just so wonderful watching these kids kind of plan out, decide who their characters are, plan out, aim for their strengths. Um, Being able to kind of describe, so one character is a bird person who's the muscle, and just like describing how they like squawk as they tear somebody's head off and bathe in their blood is just kind of typical 16-year-old behavior.
yeah. Very metal. Very metal. I'm all
Yes.
about it. Honestly, it just sounds like one of my campaigns.
Yeah.
Um,
But
so
what we see
yeah.
with these
Sorry.
role playing sessions, and what I've said on panels and things in the past, is that it's a really good space for kids to practice those social skills.
Mm,
So these are
mm.
kids, especially if they are neurodiverse. But one is also homeschooled, so they don't have that extra social contact
Okay.
otherwise.
Yeah.
But being in a situation where it's like, I put on this mask of this character and I'm going to talk and I'm going to plan and I'm going to take on your advice, um, you do consistently see improvements in that sociality outside of these sessions. Um, so this one client, when they first started, was barely speaking. They were non-speaking practically. They said five
Mm,
words in a 2-hour session, and most of those words were goose because that's their favorite animal. Um, and then to go from there to being the bathed in blood and smashing things apart has been a journey. And then hearing that
mm.
they've then gone on to do sports clubs
Wow.
journeying overseas, which was just a complete no-go for
Wow.
most of
Yeah.
their life. Um,
Mm.
yeah, is absolute signs of progress.
And the thing is that you're not just saying that, even though, obviously I'm not going to be like, oh, did you really? But
Yeah.
on your blog, you've actually done a survey. You've done a Likert style scale, and you can
Mm,
actually see with the first scale, I think it was one of the scale items was everyone was
mm,
1 out of 5 in terms of I'm at 1, I am not feeling ready to meet
mm,
other people. And then clear as day, you went back, you actually did a retest survey and everyone was 3 and above.
that's
So
right.
there's measurable data there, even from that cohort. It's almost like you've done your own sort of academic study. But taking away sort of the dryness of it, really,
Hmm.
what sort of things did you notice in terms of the players? So they were increasing their social connections. What did that sort of
Mm.
look like at the table for you over
So
time?
So one of them is just this consideration of a plan. People, for example, with ADHD, hands up, I'm one too. You can get so hyper focused. I've got an idea and it has to be implemented, and then
Yep.
it needs to be done this way because I can see how it's going to work in my head.
Hmm.
And then but you've also got like two or three other players around the table who have their own input, if not their own idea.
Mm.
So just seeing them go from no, no, this has to be this way. You have to do it kind of being that hyper focused to, oh no, hang on. What do you think? What do you think? How are you
Mm.
going to do this part?
Mm.
Because one of the good things about Scum and Villainy or those uh, Forged in the Dark slash Powered by the Apocalypse games is everyone has a section. And if you
Yeah.
screw up, you can do these flashbacks. So you can be like, oh
Mm.
no, I want a flashback and come in and come back in. Um, Another aspect as well is with the game, you have a ship or you have a base,
Yeah.
and it's a team resource. So when it levels up, the team have to negotiate what are they going to spend their XP on, what benefits is the whole group going to want.
Right.
So again, just kind of just monitor. They've gotten a lot better, but just kind of like monitoring the bulldozing that can come when people are hyper focused,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and just seeing that kind of drop off and becoming like natural behavior to them after a while.
And as a neurodiverse person yourself, and for myself, it's almost, it can feel almost sort of crippling. You can get so hyper focused on something because the brain
Mm,
is like, right there, that's where the dopamine is. I am going to block out all other extraneous noise. That includes people. So it sounds like over time, they actually developed some skills in mindfulness, really, like being
mm.
mindful that that is going to be probably an ongoing symptom that they'll need to manage. And it sounds like they actually learned some tolerance of that and some psychological flexibility with being like, instead of being blinkers on, no, 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 we have to bolt on the
Mhm.
FTL drive. I don't care about this sector. We're bolting
Yeah.
on the FTL drive. I don't care. To being like, oh, okay, I hear what you're saying. Da, 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 da.
Mm.
Yeah. So that,
And it
mm,
is beautiful when they do engage their teamwork. So, for example, one of the add-ons they decided on early on was to get an AI for their ship, so they could, to a certain extent, remote control it. And just the excitement when they finally unlocked this item, they were like, "Oh, I'm going to look up acronyms for its name. Oh, we're going to call it this, and it's going to have this kind of voice." And I'm like, just so you know, I'm going to give it a sassy personality so I can act like a teenager to the rest of you guys when it's my turn to talk. Um,
I bet
they
you
realized
loved
their
that.
mistake.
I
Oh,
bet that
it's
was
been so good.
cathartic.
Every time they're like, sorry, every time they're like, oh, ship, can you come and pick us up? Fine. It's very cathartic. Especially because one of the players at the moment is one of my own children.
Oh, wow. Amazing. And how are they finding it?
It's been so good, and I guess separately as a parent,
Mm,
having a shared hobby with one of my children has really helped our
mm,
relationship.
yeah.
They're 16, so they're going through a lot of changes themselves.
Mm,
They just changed schools as well, so they're kind of having a lot upended. Um, and so just kind of having this, not talking about what's going on between us, but just this time sharing a space effectively
mm, mm,
has really improved that.
mm, mm.
It's been a great side benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. So lots of benefits in
Mhm.
terms of running the group. What have you sort of found for yourself in running the group? Like how has that kind of improved things for you? And also maybe what sorts of they're very open-ended questions, but that's my
Mm.
game. What sort of like benefits and challenges have you found from running that group?
So in terms of benefits, look, anyone who's a game master knows that there's storytelling benefits. So just kind of being able to be like, I'm going to take my serious teacher, serious dad, serious father, husband hat off for a while, and I'm going to pretend to be a giant robot that these kids are chasing for a jungle to murder for a bounty. Um, is very freeing and a lot of fun.
Mm.
The fact that I also get paid for it, so I could justify my excessive spending on role playing accoutrements is been fantastic as well. In terms of the challenges, that probably the hard part is just kind of finding. the right players, the right balance,
Mm,
especially because we don't play Dungeons and Dragons, so I don't
mm,
get the same marketing um, boost
yeah.
that saying we play D&D provides. But I do kind of stick with that because I do believe that D&D isn't the best system for this kind of therapy.
Mm,
Um,
okay.
and just I know most companies don't have D&D, so I'm not going against the strain when I say that out loud, but
Mm,
I just find it so yeah, it's so slow, so wound up, and uh the kids like having hard rules and
mm,
being told exactly what it can do. So when there's so many things like uh uh persuasion roll, is it some DMs treat it like mind control, some people try to treat it as mild suggestions. So these kids
mm,
not having the same across experience across both games can be harder for them as well.
mm.
Mm,
That's an interesting note because I would sort of expect to think, I mean, my opinions on 5e are pretty famous. They're plastered all over my blog. But
yes.
I find that interesting that because what most people would tend to think is
Mm,
if I wanted to run something where that is actually kind of supporting that, maybe concreteness of thought or that need
mm,
for literal thought, that sort of need for
mhm,
clarification that neurodivergent folks often have. The first thing you would think is, well, wouldn't more rules be better? But it's interesting that you're saying that you've veered away from that to
mhm.
systems that are more rules light. And yeah,
I wouldn't say they're rules light, because so for example, if you are playing a Powered by the Apocalypse game and you do the equivalent of a perception check, so you, depending on the system, it might have different
mm,
names, but most often what will happen is you'll get a list of questions you can ask,
mm,
and about the situation that indicates what you've been looking for. So
mm,
you're walking through a forest, you hear a twig snap, you roll that perception check or whatever the awareness check sometimes it's called,
mm,
and you get to ask, what is there danger here? What is the closest escape route? And you get to pick, depending on how well you roll, a number of questions to answer. Whereas with
right,
D&D, can you tell me the difference between a 10 or a 14 on a
mm,
perception check? Like,
mm,
what's the
mm,
mechanical difference between that? It's up to the
mm.
GM.
Mm. So really what you're saying is that it's more pointed in its directions in terms of you're not just sort of left wandering in that space and trying to rely on your working memory. The group, everyone's looking at you, it's your turn. What do
Mm.
I do? What do I even ask? That's actually been provided for you in that format. Yeah.
That's right. And
Mm,
then tied into that as well, D&D is very specific, very specifically tied to its attribute system. So
mm,
you could have, so you, for example, your bard has high charisma, your
mm,
barbarian typically has high strength. But I'll tell you what, if somebody the size of Conan was coming up and trying to intimidate me, their charisma stat wouldn't matter. It would be their strength. It would be their
yeah.
ability to crush my head like a melon.
Yeah.
And yet the stats, but in stats, in terms of stats, the foppish bard would have a +4 to intimidate usually, whereas the bard would have the charisma dumping barbarian would have a -1. Like
Mm,
it
mm.
doesn't it doesn't align with what could happen, I
Mm,
find.
mm, mm.
Mm.
So have you found, so you mentioned that you had done D&D and you've now
Yep.
moved back to PBTA with that
Mhm.
group. Have you guys tried any other sorts of systems or is that the only sort of two that you've run with the group?
Um, So we've done a few different ones. We did Fragged Empire for a little while as a little short stint,
Mm-hmm.
which, if you're not familiar, is a Melbourne-designed role-playing game set in a far distant future where humanity has died out, and basically all the genetic mishmashes that we created before we went the way of the dodo are left fighting over the scraps. Um, Very fun system. I really enjoyed it, but the kids kind of didn't gel with it as much as I'd hoped, so we moved on from there. In between our kind of bridging Powered by the Apocalypse game was one, I think it's called Toons. I might need to look this up, but it's based on being cartoon characters. So just this kind of slapstick, you can do whatever you like, and if it can happen, if Bugs Bunny can do it, then you can too. Um, Action was very fun. One of the characters literally blew up an entire armada, and this was like written on the character sheet. It wasn't like extrapolation. It said you destroy an army if you roll this high. Um, So that was
Love it.
very frustrating to have my army destroyed in one roll.
Oh, yeah, and it's the dice gods. You've just got to go with what the dice gods say. Yeah.
And it's just like it's written on there. Like I did this thing. Like, oh, great. Um,
Awesome.
and sometimes when I don't have enough players, we'll play systems like 2400
Mm,
and Tricube Tales, which are really kind of even lighter. Like what these tend to be one-page RPGs,
mm,
and the people can make a character sheet that's the size of an index card.
mm,
Um, I did one for Christmas late last year where the characters were all like claymation style creatures from, those kind of claymation movies that you and I grew up with. But
mm.
they were stuck in Nakatomi Plaza and Hans Group had inadvertently kidnapped Santa and they needed to rescue him. Um, so,
Love it.
so having that was, yeah, having those available for one shots has been fun.
And so you also designed TOTS, which is, I believe, based off the TriCube system.
That's right, yeah. It's a much more simplified version. So at the time when I started working on inventing this system, I was working for a special needs school
Mm,
part-time, which is basically an environment when you have, basically everyone needs supports. Most of the children are non-speaking.
mm,
They might have mobility issues or hand function issues. So I was looking at that, starting to get my idea for my what I mentioned before in terms of those role-playing classes.
mm,
And I thought, well, how would you make a role-playing game so simple that these kids could still participate?
mm,
Um, so I created Tots with that idea. The character sheet has no words on it. It's literally just images. And the idea being that you can, if as long as you can kind of describe what you're wanting to do in a way of strength-based, quickness-based, or intelligence-based, or brains-based, then you can roll for it and give it a go.
awesome.
Um, and I'm working on an expansion at the moment where it doesn't even need dice. Like it just needs some kind of element of chance. So because some people can't roll dice, or they might be vision impaired, but if
Mm,
we can find some other way of involving them, then going from there.
mm.
Hmm.
I mean, what's coming through clearly, I mean, I know you, I have background history, but I guess for the listeners and the viewers, that accessibility is a strong focus for you.
It really is because there are a lot of social benefits to playing role-playing games.
Mm,
There is a lot of fun to be had. So this
mm.
kind of image of people who play these games who are just basement-dwelling troglodytes who hiding behind who just, get together and play games against each other.
Covered in
To quote
Dorito dust.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, to quote the IT crowd, Dungeons and Dragons, is that a sex thing? Gosh, no, Jen. Um, Um, yeah, so whereas if you can put it into schools, you can put it um into birthday parties. I've run games for birthday parties before. You put it into people's lives, they can get that social connection that sometimes people can lack, but still kind of mask it between I'm having fun playing as this paladin devouring dragon born person. Hmm.
Mm, mm. And so for yourself too, Dan, like you've got a lot of things on the boil. We're
Mhm.
talking game design here. We're talking, I mean, we've been chatting a lot about what you're doing, but how are
Mhm.
you kind of finding that how are you sort of managing that kind of a workload?
Yeah. So as I said, the main thing is having something for yourself. So,
Mm,
my wife and I, we both are proponents of everyone having a hobby and separate from the family and separate from each other.
mm,
So, my wife has played in the 15 years we've been together. She's played role-playing games once or twice. I've managed to trick her in all that time. So she's definitely so when I do my role-playing stuff, it's off to the side. It's my thing. It's my own little space.
mm.
For her, it's Glee Club and choir. So I'm banned from singing because I'm so bad at it.
I
So
love that.
yeah, I'm allowed to mouth percuss. I'm not allowed to join in because I have no sense of rhythm and timing. Um, so she has that every week. And
Mm,
so we kind of for both of us, that's such a good little like separation of okay, so it's separate from work, it's separate from family. This is my own space,
mm.
and it's been so good for both of us.
Awesome.
Um, and then on top of that, I'm part of a group called the Men's Table, just a member.
Mm,
Um, But for anyone who's not familiar, it's all around Australia, and the basic idea is that men get together once a month at a pub, usually, or at a restaurant, have a meal together, and basically just talk about what's on their mind, or what get what they need off their chest.
Right.
And again, that's just something that's been really positive to have this ability to be able to go in, say what's on my mind, on my heart, and not feel like I'm being judged, not feel like I'm being solved at as well, which I think
Right.
is a real problem when dudes get together and vent,
Yes.
is that we often
Yep.
want to fix each other.
Yep.
Um, it's actually a rule of the men's table that you're not allowed to solve.
Oh wow.
And
Okay. They'd have trouble with
um,
me as a social worker then.
Well, it's really interesting because so they got a bunch of rules, but the two ones that stick out to me the most, and I can look up the rest if we need to.
Mm,
But the first one is no solving.
mm,
So if somebody comes up to say, "Look, I'm having a lot of trouble with my child at the moment. They're wagging school, and I don't
mm.
know. We're working her through, and I don't know what to do." And people can say, "Look, I can. Would you like some advice?" But if somebody says, "No, I just wanted to vent," then we can just move on, and everyone kind of gets that 10 minutes to talk it through what's on their mind.
That's
Um,
really powerful, man. That's really powerful.
it's it's kind of hard as well, like
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
for the most part we want to be helpers, and I think that's part of what's hardwired into a lot of people, into a lot of men, is that we
Mm,
are hardwired to be the solvers and the helpers in that sense.
mm,
Um,
mm,
but also it's been known for a long time that in some ways that's a problem because some people just want to talk.
mm,
Um, So yeah, having this ability to just come in, say what's on my mind, leave it there,
mm,
and move on,
mm.
with about a dozen other people who are just also living their lives and having their problems and yeah.
It's a very sort of, it's something that sounds possibly easier to do in theory than in practice, but I find it interesting that you're engaged with that space as well as the tabletop space because both I think in terms of male culture, male Western
Mm,
values, especially Australian male values, it's sort of like, again, as you're saying, at one point in time, it's less so now. But
mm,
RPGs was seen as a bit gauche, or
mhm,
getting together to talk about feelings. Like that's sort of they're both very much bucking those gender norms, but for me, I feel like it's only really kind of bucking Western norms that men have about mental health, that we're very individuated, very individualized. And as you said, you've got a strong psychosocial focus. And
mm,
isn't it just interesting that it's sort of Western culture has gotten to a point where we're seeking those kinds of spaces out. You're going to places like Men's Table where that very sort of functional natural, but also very
mm,
kind of functional and task oriented approach is like, no, we're actually just going to sit with the emotional side of it.
yeah.
That's an entirely new skill set for a lot of men, I think.
Well, I think what it does also is highlight just how bad it is for men when we have the patriarchy and that type of toxic masculinity, where
Mm,
we're expected to compartmentalize and even dismiss parts of ourselves
mm,
in order to function in that Western ideal of what a bloke is. Um,
mm,
so speaking for myself, I was raised Catholic. I, as the son of immigrants, I
mm.
was so. I went to an all boys school,
Yep.
and up until my 20s, I don't think I met somebody who was out of the closet gay. And
Mm,
so for a long time, I struggled to make friendships with people who were LGBTQI.
mm,
Whereas now and because I was told that being gay is a weakness, showing any kind
mm.
of femininity was part of that weakness. Not liking football, not liking those kind of blokey things
Yep.
was all a weakness. And then now it's when I've kind of unlearned that over my time at university and in the years since, it's like, no, you can like what you like. These things aren't tied to gender. Um, you can enjoy what you want to enjoy. You can be soft and gentle and still be a blokey person. You
Mm,
can still care for people without forcing yourself into solving their solution when they don't, their space might not need it.
mm.
Um, these are all things that can still be in their own way masculine, but just not this blokey, potentially toxic way of hiding who you are.
Do you find that I find that the interesting kind of thread between the two is that my
Mm,
experience with tabletop role playing is it's very equalizing in that sense too for men, because you're
mm,
going in thinking I'm going to be Conan the Barbarian and I'm going to do 10d6 bludgeoning damage, but you actually often end up in scenarios that require maybe restraint or connectedness. You know what I mean?
mm.
I think I think it can be an interesting experience for male adults to enter into the TTRPG hobby because it is actually a lot more emotionally in depth than people might realize too. And I think that's part of the appeal. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but
Well, I think that the what I've been saying about that kind of toxic masculinity often comes out in what you and I would describe it as things like main character syndrome, where
mm,
somebody has come in and they're like, "I am going to be the Conan, but the barbarian leader of this group, and I everything's going to revolve around me. My backstory is that I'm 10,000 years old and have these ancient swords of power." Um, I ran a game recently for a bunch of teenagers and let them bring their own characters, and one of them brought in a character that had 22 maximum stat, normally maximum 20, if you're not aware of how D&D
too.
works.
How they
And
pull that one off?
yeah, and the lowest stat was 14, and apparently it was this homebrew match they were doing with that game they were doing with their father, and I'm like, yeah, your dad's making you cheat. Like this isn't how we do things. This isn't a normal game. This is like a level 7 character that had all these ridiculous stats. Um, so yeah, I think that there is potential for toxicity.
Mm,
Um, I think that what we do need to still be aware of it because there are people who can come in and run a toxic game, and unfortunately, that because the GM usually is so social, they're often trying to find social solutions to these things. Tell
mm,
like oh, I've got problem players. How do I deal with it? And they're being told, oh, you just include in the game that whatever they're stealing gets taken off them by the gods or whatever. And it's like, well, maybe just tell them that their behavior is unacceptable and either move them on if they can't accept that,
mm.
or find a way to show them how to behave.
So
So there
really,
is,
a lot of the solutions out there that you do see, I think it's getting better, but
mm,
definitely historically, I think a lot of the solutions were, oh, add an environmental hat, like make them pay, make them
mm,
suffer, and that's not really kind of teaching the consequence, really. If
mm,
anything, if RPGs are to be sort of like if they're to have verisimilitude and to have a reflection of real life, well, the consequences have got to be kind of, we were talking about emotional depth before. There's got to be
mm,
those kinds of consequences attached. And I think that's what we were talking about. We're talking about problem players. I
mm,
think that people can potentially come in. It seems like there's a few different types, but what I find with folks like that wanting to come in and just go hard, it's
mm,
interesting to watch sometimes that people will get in and very quickly go, oh, ooh, like they actually respond to that group-based dynamic. But
mm.
every now and then you've got someone that's just, it sounds like have you had people that were just, nope, they're stuck on that power fantasy and they're not getting off that track?
Well, I think I definitely did at the start when I first. So I've only been playing RPGs for about 10 or so years, maybe a little bit
Mm,
longer. So at the start, yeah, absolutely just having randoms come in and, train railing all over my game. What we have now is we have that extra knowledge of having things like session zeros, where you lay out the
mm,
group rules.
mm,
Um, you have systems like X cards, which is where
mm.
if somebody's having too much of a time, they can just put their hand on an X and will move on the scene, whether it's the GM description or another player's description. Um, so we have these extra tools that can kind of head off that toxic behavior. If you have that kind of nutter who's anti-woke, whatever nonsense, and we're not going to let that into my game, and they come into one of my games where I'm like, okay, so here's my session zero. This is what's allowed. This is not allowed. If you start to feel any kind of pressure, here's the X card. You can tap that in whenever you want. I think my wokeness will keep those people away from my games now. Like by
Yeah.
having these systems will head that off early.
Yeah, it's kind of self-selective, isn't it? It's sort of like by
Mm,
virtue of having those things in place and having that strong focus on, I want to make sure you all feel included and feel safe. Well, someone
mm,
who's read, I don't know, I'm making sweeping generalizations, 20 rules, how to cl go clean your room. I mean, I can't
mm.
talk. Look at that horrific mess over there. But, Jordan
My background is blurred
Peterson,
for a reason, yes.
Ayn Rand orbit of
Mm,
that style of, yeah. I think
mm,
people pick up on that vibe pretty quick, but that's the other good part about safety tools, isn't it, too? Because it actually it's a good establishment of group norms and but also boundaries and expectations because I think a lot of game masters they're often folks like ourselves, maybe neurodiverse, in helping professions, it's someone who wants to facilitate a good experience for people.
mm.
And at times, especially getting into this hobby, it's quite, it is geeky.
Yeah.
So you do tend to get a lot of people that might be a little bit more sort of introverted, or not actually realize at the outset what
Mm,
is actually the reality of it's not just running a module. You're actually
mm.
having to properly, it's an actual management skill being a game
Yeah.
master. And I think a lot of GMs entering into the hobby can really struggle with that. I really struggled myself as well entering into the GM hobby, running some one shots and again,
Mm,
randoms. Um, yeah, I think I had the same experience, and I don't know about you, but for me, I think that stemmed more from just being there seems to be a very specific kind of assertiveness skill tied to GMing as well,
mm,
which
mhm.
extrapolates nicely elsewhere. But yeah, I don't know about you, but I had some hard learning curves where I was like, well, I don't want to upset the boat. I don't want to, I don't want to rock the boat. I want everyone to have a good time. I want this to be a perfect magical adventure where we all get along and it's 100% good and no one has a bad session ever. And some of that sort of perfectionism or wanting to ensure everyone's having a good time, it's great in its intent, but isn't it interesting with game mastering where it's like you actually at sometimes need to be quite forceful and directive and utilitarian as well too, because in those sorts of situations, it's like I can please everyone, but
Yeah.
if I'm pleasing everyone, including this problem, actually the net benefit is everyone's going to have a worse time.
Well, I think it's very telling that most of the professional GMs I know are all primary school teachers. Like, there's
Yeah.
a very high percentage ratio there.
Yeah. And it's perfectly adapted for that. Gang, just wanted to let you guys know that we are currently featuring some artist tracks, especially independent and up and coming artists. So while we took a little bit of a break, Dan and myself, for the interview, I'd like to feature a track from Mickey Lilly, who sent us an email to innerstrengthcheckmedia@gmail.com, requesting some coverage. So we're very into covering bands and especially independent bands, creators, publishers, tabletop artists, that sort of thing, game designers. If you've got something and you would like it featured on a podcast episode and or our social media or blog post, feel free to email us and you can check out all our links at innerstrengthcheckpodcast.com. But for now, I'm going to leave you with Dragon Lady, which is a very funky rock and roll track from a band called Vermilion Sun. So enjoy the track, have a bit of a break, have a stretch, have a boogie, jump around, do whatever you need to, and then Dan and myself will see you shortly. Do be sure to figure out to check out these guys. I will have links in the show notes for the podcast as well as the interview. Peace.
She calls to me in dark horizon, a subtle way to read my mind. She wraps her hands around my throat. No, weave a spell and tell me lies.
Okay, we are back after a break, feeling very refreshed. Thanks
I,
for that enlightening first part discussion, Dan. That was really cool.
I just got my mug of tears of my players for the second half.
Yes, yes, very enlightening. Allow me to sip the tears. Oh, delicious. It's full of egotistical barbarians. So I guess we've kind of talked around the more sort of professional side of things, but I think before we sort of wrap up today, I'm just interested to get stuck into a bit of a powwow for you about
Yeah.
GMing because you mentioned it's a great escape. It's your hobby, obviously.
Mm.
So what's your hobby looking like? What's your hobby life looking like at the moment? What have you got on at the moment?
Yeah. So at the moment, I'm running. So I run my neurodiverse kids once a week.
Mm,
I've also got my own podcast called Mist World. We're about to start recording the third and final season for that. Um, that's been really fun. It was a campaign I thought of while we were in lockdown, and
mm,
was this kind of like, at least for me, visceral response to the fact that we were stuck inside and locked
mm,
in for so long, and against something that was pretty much felt like it was everywhere at the time.
mm,
Um, just separately to that, I rewatched. I've been rewatching a show called Mythic Quest, which is an Apple TV video game series, and they have an episode in the first season about being in lockdown, and I was just like, oh my God, that was really only just not so long ago, but it feels
yeah,
like it's been a lot longer than it
yeah.
has. Um, yeah, so we're just kind of enjoying that and working with a really good, fun group of people over there.
Okay.
Um, But I also have like games that I play in. So I've got a game of Pathfinder 2 that I'm a player in,
Mm,
and I play a druid who shapeshifts specializes in, and I just got the ability to shapeshift into dragons. And it's just
nice.
basically this character is just like, yes, I've got a full caster spell list of things I can do. I don't do any of that. We don't do that here. I'm here to eat people. So so every time we go to a fight, it's like like I just like reflect. I was like, look, going for my spell list. Like, oh yeah, Korea could have been useful if I'd cast over those spells. But also, like, I just literally ate the bad guy, so it's fine. Like, didn't need to overthink this bullshit. And it's
That's
kind of
amazing.
fun. It's just so fun to be just like, I'm not going to strategize this. This character is literally the Hulk of the group. Every time there's
Love it.
planning, like heavy thinking Dan's like, I've got an idea, but but my character doesn't. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, the one time that I spoke up in this game, um, basically it's an evil campaign. We're bad guys,
Right.
hence the constant eating. And we had this like evil temple that we were restoring, and this group of paladins came up and were like scouting the area, were getting ready to attack us, and we knew that there was a good um, dragon around that was checking out the area. And so I said, well, I'm going to shapeshift into this dragon, go up and tell him it's all chill. I've taken care of it. You guys need to get out of here before the corruption takes you too. And everyone was like, "All right, like you're the tank anyway, you can like give it a go." So I did that, and I rolled amazingly, and the GM rolled their insight check incredibly poorly, and so
Yes.
every time ever since then, everyone's been like, "Oh, we need to plan something out." I'm like, "Well, we could run off my existing success run of 1 for 1, and I'll tell you what we're going to do next." And thankfully, none of them have taken me seriously since.
That must feel so cathartic, man, being like playing an evil campaign because you're doing teaching, you're doing a lot of stuff for the greater good, you're GMing, you're running the games. That just sounds like such a lovely little break to be like, nah, you know what? I'm gonna go eat me some paladins and
That's right.
clerics.
It is. Look, I recommend it.
Hmm.
It is a specific published campaign, so if people are looking for their own version um of evil, it's called Something Wicked This Way Comes. I think it's a Pathfinder 1 campaign
Ah,
that my
nice.
GM is updating.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, it's just you get a little bit of base building, you get a little bit of basically the game starts off with you escape from prison and are released by demons who are looking for people to recruit, and you're basically given a choice of sign up with Asmodeus or be gone for or be killed forever. And it's like, all right, as long as it doesn't like clash with my existing nature ideals, I'm down for killing humans. Um,
That's amazing. It's like Dungeon Keeper, the Dungeon Keeper. You remember the
mm,
Dungeon Keeper games?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like Dungeon Keeper the RPG, and there was also that indie RPG Kickstarter, which I don't
Mm.
think I ever got the physical for. I think it actually tanked. I've got the digital files, but it's essentially that. It's you're the bad guys, and you're actually establishing a foothold with corruption and darkness and all that sort of thing. How does that sort of compare with running Mistworld? What
Um,
system are you using for Mistworld by out of interest?
so with Mistworld, we're using something called Tiny Dungeon.
Oh,
So
nice, nice.
it's, if you're not familiar, super basic system. It only uses two six-sided dice.
Mm,
Um, it's basically you create characters and you can give them traits, and it's it can be played by children. I really wanted that again because when you a lot of times when you listen to actual plays, you can get so caught up on the kind of tactical strategies that just don't work for audio. So
yeah.
having this much simpler system and being just like it doesn't even have stats. It's basically just like you've got feats that let you do extra things on top of
Mm,
normal things. Um, and just being like, oh, you want to try that? The rules say I can't stop you. Off you, so off you go. Um, and just kind of building it around that has been really good.
mm,
Um, and part of the reason why I did that as well was because I wanted to have a super simple self-contained campaign.
yeah.
So the first series is a total of about 8 episodes, so relatively short for actual plays,
Mm,
and the characters go from zeros to dragon killers.
awesome.
Um, and and then the second series was a bit of the Empire Strikes Back, where they try and take out a god and get folded like a pair of socks. And then uh, season three is round two of that, and kind of how do you come back from there?
Amazing. It's like Skyrim meets Star Wars by the sounds of it.
Yeah, it's and the reason for the reason for the name Mistworld is because effectively the whole world is covered by this very poisonous toxic mist.
Mm,
So at the start in the first season, they yeah, in an airship floating above, trying to find what they need to in order to take down a dragon, and basically make sure as well that the dragon is the threat that people think it is.
mm.
Um, and in a surprising twist at the end of the first season, they get pulled down into the mist and realize that it's actually just the top layer that's toxic. There's people underneath. Um,
Right.
but you get this kind of like, what's the Stranger Things other side? The upside down?
Yeah. The upside
Yeah,
down. That's it. Yeah.
yeah. It's a bit of an upside down world where there's no liquid, very little liquid. You can't see very far at all. They're getting at one point they're getting chased and hounded by things they can only hear. Um, they
Nice.
come across the corpse of things that they'd killed before that had been like taken over by parasites, but they needed shelter, so they went inside and hid inside um, this corpse. Um, yeah, it was
Brutal.
very different.
Very metal.
Mm.
And so that sounds great. Like you've got Tiny Dungeons, you've got Pathfinder. What are some of your favorite systems? I already know one of the answers to this. But what are
Um,
some of your favorite systems to run slash play?
Yeah. So the short answer is system. So when you can have a system that can do multiple settings,
Mm,
so I usually really enjoy them because it means that if you're a bit bored of fantasy, you don't have to relearn a whole system to
yeah,
do cyberpunk. You can
yeah.
just change the labels, change the weapons from a bow to a smart gun, and more or less continue as you did.
Mm,
Um, so you and I both like Savage Worlds,
mm,
um, which incidentally has its own evil campaign. I don't know if I'm about to blow
mm.
your mind or not. Um, there's a setting called Necessary Evil, which is a superhero setting
Mm,
where basically an alien invasion came, they killed all the good guys, and all that's left to defend the Earth are the bad guys. And so you play as a supervillain who's got no choice but basically to save the world
that's
from this
amazing.
alien
That's
threat.
awesome. Do you find that having that modular system like Savage Worlds, because I mean, I could show my shelf of shame, but I won't. But I've got quite a lot of unplayed systems, and I think for me, with ADHD, it's that prospect of going, oh, okay, now I have to kind of grind for a bit with my
Mm,
dyscalculic brain and relearn all these mechanics enough. But also, as you mentioned, it's Savage Worlds in particular, I think it's kind of like GURPS, right? Like it's very
mm,
modular and it's kind of almost purpose built for folks like us that are like, you know what? Um, the trickle of dopamine's run out for fantasy. I'm just not into
yeah,
it. But we got to go sci-fi now, or we've got to
yeah.
go this way. Do you find it helps accommodate that, like following your muse, following your hyperfixation sort of thing?
It really does. And what's good about Savage Worlds, or Suede, as the current edition is called, is that you can even create your own races. Like there's rules around that. So
Mm,
if even if you do find or create your own feats or create your own weapons. So even if you do find that, oh, I can't find exactly what I'm after. I want to have a world where people are literal elephant people and also there's fairies, and I want to be able to have mechanics around both.
yeah,
Playing Eva. It's like, well, Savage Worlds actually lets you do that. So you can make your own bullshit make it as well as taking existing settings.
love it.
Um, to step away from Suede as well, my other favorite system at the moment is Powered by the Apocalypse, because similar
Yep.
thing. It's
Mm,
not quite as modular. It's more about it's very easy that other people build settings around.
mm,
So, um, and it's I think Cousin Blades in the Dark, Forge in the Dark
mm,
systems as well. Um, so you can have Blades in the Dark, which is fantasy based. You're a gang robbing people in your haunted city. Um, you can pick up those same rules, plonk them into a sci-fi skin, and then you've got Scum and Villainy, which is that Star Warsy one. You can
mm,
pick them up, put them into a cyberpunk skin, and then you've got forgotten its name, but there's another system that allows for that, and you can just keep on going on and on that way.
mm.
Um, and then, yeah, powered by the apocalypse, you've got uh, glittering sword lesbians, I believe is one of them, which
Yeah,
does
yeah. I
very
saw
much
that
what it
one at
says
my
in the
local, and
box.
I was like, "Excuse me." I'm
Yeah,
sure. I'm looking at this like, "Oh, okay, that's certainly a thing that exists." Yeah.
yeah. And then you got Chasing Adventure, which is the D&D type analog, which is very
Mm,
good. Or or again, you got sci-fi based ones as well. So you can just kind of like super simple, pick it up, plonk it down somewhere else. Um, that tiny dungeon also has a tiny D6 system, which
mm.
also works for sci-fi, and they've also got a rule set where you get to play as kaiju versus mechas.
Oh,
So again, once
nice.
you nailed out the systems, you can then pick them up and put them anywhere. Um,
Are there any other RPGs you've sort of looked at and thought, I want to try that? Maybe not right now with the 800 billion things I've got on my task list, but
yeah.
do you have any sort of wish list RPGs that you would actually like to try?
So I'd love to play in a Savage Rifts system. So if you haven't heard of Rifts, it is the ultimate ADHD system. Basically the idea is that it's on planet Earth in the near future, and portals to everywhere opened up, fucked up the planet, and now everything is on the world planet. And when I say everything, by the single saw core book, you can play as a dragon, you can play as a Gundam pilot, you can play as Hawkeye and just be a dude with a bow and arrow. You can play as Captain America, the Juicer class with a Death Wish. Um, you can play all these different things, and you can play as a Xenomorph if you get one of the other books as well, which I was very excited to build.
Nice.
Um,
Nice.
but it feels like a treasure I can only give to others because I've yet to find somebody willing to GM this for me.
Yeah, yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? Like Rift's GMs are rare as hen's teeth, but it's just such the ultimate like it feels like Adult Swim, the RPG,
Mm,
right? Like just this collection, it's like drawn together, just like a house full of people where you're like, what?
yeah.
Yeah. Well,
So that
before
would probably be
we
my ultimate.
your ultimate,
Mm.
well, maybe I have to have a think about that. Maybe I have to no.
No,
When I'm gainfully
don't make
employed,
promises
I'll
you
be
can't keep.
yeah, I know, right? Again, ADHD. It's ideas. Someone wants to run a campaign. Um, awesome. And I think to sort of wrap things up, Dan, just in general, with with yourself being neurodiverse and yourself being having a lot of responsibilities and that kind of thing, um, what sort of advice would you give to other game masters who are finding themselves tight on time or feeling like they want to get into the hobby, but
Mhm.
thinking, well, I'm actually quite a busy person and I have a pretty busy schedule, and that seems like a
Mm.
whole bunch of like a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
What are some of the sorts of things that keep you engaged in the hobby and like basically sustain you? Like, how do you sort of maintain the hobby with everything you've got going on outside of it as a GM and a player?
I think the main thing is having the right group of people.
Mm,
So if you've got the option to be able to choose who the players are, if you need to have strangers in, just kind of giving them a rehearsal before you're saying they're definitely in. Um, I think that's a real big part of it because you're not just playing with strangers, you are playing with people that you to a certain extent care about and care
yeah,
about their feelings and how they feel about it. Um, the second one I would say as well is, as I mentioned before, D&D is a massive time suck, especially when combat breaks out, which is, let's face it, 60% of the game.
it's an MMO.
So
It can become an MMO slugfest. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. So just being open to other systems.
Mm,
So um, Powered by the Apocalypse, really good for that because the GM doesn't roll. All kind of combat is on the side of a player is resolved by the player's roll. Um, so it is much easier and quicker. Being able to play online, so most of my games, except for the one I play with the kids, are online, and just being open to that. There's a lot of free resources out there that you can use to support that. Like Owlbear Rodeo is the good
mm,
one, and
love
there's
Albert
playing on
Road.
Discord. It's
Yeah,
so good, right?
yeah,
Um, yeah, so just kind of and just playing with what you have. And but also just remember, it is just a hobby. So if you're like, oh, I can't run a weekly game, but I can do monthly, just get that dopamine hit when you can, right?
that's
Like it
it.
doesn't,
That's it.
yeah.
Mm, mm. If you got to make
And
adjustments, and I think for those listening and watching, that might be budding GMs, there is that kind of, it's almost like there's a little bit of a cliff of fear and anxiety, but once you're over that hump, it actually turns into a pretty much an addiction, right? Like
yeah,
you go in
and
thinking, how can I do this? And then you start doing it, and you're like, I can't stop this now. I can't turn
yeah.
this off. I'm in.
Yeah. And I think the last thing I would say as well is no one is a Matt, very there's only one Matt Mercer. There's only one amazing famous GM who can pull all the voices and storytelling and everything. So just be kind. If people are coming back and enjoying your game, then you're a good GM. You don't
Mm,
need I can't do voices. I've never been able to do voices. This is not part of my game. But people still keep coming back because they're enjoying the story side of things
mm.
or they're enjoying the fun that we have. Mm.
Mm. And see, on the other side of the coin, I was born with the maths and logic part of my brain completely scooped out, and I can do voices till the end of time. And I often go, "Oh, well, I forgot this ruling, I forgot that ruling." But time, my advice to everyone would be time and experience just show you, right? Like players,
Mm.
if the players are rocking up to the sessions, if some of the players are rocking up to the sessions, that's a success. That's a win. People are wanting to carve out space and time to basically be part of your game, to be part of your experience. We can get very perfectionistic and go away from a 4 hour session and go, oh my God, I forgot that +1 armor rule. But trust me, guys, at the end of the day, the players are there to be part of a story, to hear the story, to have fun. We're just playing choose your own adventure with dice at the end of the day.
Mm.
And as long as it's engaging and it's safe, I think everyone has a great time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And speaking of a great time, it's been wonderful to chat with you, mate. I could crap on forever, dude, talking about ADHD. I think we'll leave it there, but thank you so much for joining us, Dan. And where can people find you if they want to check out your various happenings?
So if you Google either, search on Spotify for Mistworld, which is
Mhm.
my story-based podcast, Aussie Roll Call, which is a podcast where I interview Aussie role-playing creatives with my co-host Kate and Stevie, and there is also D TV, where I myself and Jeremy are talking through various TV series and how they'd make good D&D campaigns. So right now we're doing The Good Place, which is a surprisingly good D&D campaign potential.
Yeah, true, true. Nice. All right, I'm definitely going to hit that one up. Thanks so much for your time, Dan, and we'll chat soon, mate. And maybe,
Thank you.
hopefully, at some stage, stars align, we can actually get a game of some sort in together.
That would be amazing.
Awesome. All right, thanks so much, dude. You take care.
You too.
See you, mate.
A-Rock could be the last one doing it. You know what I'm saying? Riding on my jock, you know what I'm saying? I'm just